Hello, everybody. It's Michael Hollands for Sound of the Movies. Today, I have the pleasure to be joined by Simon West. Over the course of his career, Simon has directed films such as Con Air, The General's Daughter, Tomb Raider, When a Stranger Calls, The Expendables 2, Stolen, Wildcard, Skyfire, and many more. It is my pleasure to welcome Mr. Simon West.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
It's great to have you on my show. Thank you very much for taking a time out of your schedule. I really appreciate that.
No problem. As I said, it's great to be here. Good to talk to you.
Simon, before you became a film director, you had worked on commercials and also music videos. How did Jerry Bruckheimer discover you back then? Con Air was the first film you directed, which was released in 1997. How did everything come about?
Well, I think through commercials, and I have to say that it's like that was kind of my plan from the start is how to get into movies. And growing up in the UK and watching how other directors had done it, I did my training at the BBC in the film editing department. So I started as a trainee film editor, and but soon started making my own films with the BBC's equipment, I have to say, out of hours. And then I looked at how do you get into movies? And in the UK at that time, most of the directors had made it through commercials. It was like Ridley Scott, Tony Scott, Adrian Lyne, people like that. And so I did an actual, I suppose, a conscious decision to try and get in commercials. And to get into commercials, I went through music videos because they were they were the new hot thing, music videos at the time, and it was sort of easier for a young upstart to get into that. So I did some of that music video work, but it was never really my passion because I wanted to work with actors and stories. And so even when I went into commercials, um, I tended to choose things that had actors and stories, which ended up being mostly comedy. And the reason was that I kind of got typecast because I did one test spec commercial in the UK that I edited out of a music video I'd done, and I made it into a sort of fake commercial. And then I kind of got on the plane, went to LA, and with this one commercial in my hand that wasn't even a real commercial, and started touting that around, and started gradually after quite a while to get offers. But because of my only commercial was a comedy commercial, that's what I got offered, and I was quite happy with it for a while because again, it wasn't cars driving through landscapes, it wasn't models on a beach, it was it was actors and dialogue, and it was like little mini films. So I got to practice my art, and but I became a comedy commercials director, and that sort of got quite tired after a couple of years. Even though the commercials were getting bigger and bigger, and they were getting on the Super Bowl, and which is obviously the zenith for commercials in the States. And but by chance, one of the commercials I'd done was actually had some action in it, and I wasn't really an action director or anything like that. But this one commercial, and it got on the Super Bowl, and Jerry Bruckheimer spotted it and called me up. And at the time, I had got noticed by other studios and producers, and I was actually offered a couple of other films from other studios. And again, they tended to be comedy or romantic comedies or CGI comedies. And Jerry called me in, and I had a meeting with him, and he offered me Con Air. And amongst other things, he gave me three scripts actually, and I had over the one weekend I had to choose between these three action films that he had, and said, you choose which one you want to do, and we'll do it. And one of them was Con Air, and I chose that one over all the other comedies because I was sort of tired of doing comedy and didn't know anything about action, never shot anything with a gun in it, never shot a fight scene, never really hadn't. I mean, I'd done, limited stuff like that, but and I'd shot for many years in different places. I'd shot in, out of helicopters. I've shot underwater. I've shot on mountains. Half the countries of the world, but not really action. So I had to learn fast on the spot, really, when I was making Con Air. and it was like my action movie film school. And in the end, it was looking back, it was kind of hard to turn the comedy muscle off. So really, I think Con Air ended up being more of a comedy than it maybe, it was intended to be to start with. It was pretty, it had great characters, and that's why I chose it. Scott Rosenberg wrote these great characters with great dialogue, and we worked on it, and I invented more and more ridiculous scenes because Jerry kept coming in and saying, "It's got to be bigger, it's got to be bigger." Because it started off as quite a small film with just 12 angry men on a plane, and Jerry said, "You got to make this a summer movie." So I just kept coming up with these more ridiculous and larger than life scenes, and that's what expanded into Con Air and became this huge operatic action comedy, really. And so that was how that came about.
Right. And it probably was also a baptism by fire to some extent, right?
Absolutely. I had no idea. I mean, the most I'd done before that was like a 7 day shoot on a commercial, and now I was facing a 100-day shoot with, a much bigger crew and, much bigger actors. Half the actors on my set were Oscar winners, and I didn't realize quite how tough it was going to be. And I think by day 30, I thought, there's no way I'm going to finish this thing. But after I hit the wall, I think at day 30, then it got easier and it became my day job. And I never thought it was going to end. It was so long. But it was, it became fun after that as I got into it. And as I said, I learned on the job and I learned, fast.
Back then, when Con Air was shot, CGI, of course, was not as commonplace as it is today, and on top of that, it was tremendously expensive. So, as I understand, the majority of the film was shot in camera and done practically. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, it's also my preference, and to do that because it was early days for CGI, and if you had a lot of money, you could have high quality CGI. But it was always my preference to shoot, on film and with everything happening in front of the camera. So I think there's like one shot in the film that wasn't possible to do practically when it's when the car is being dragged through the air, and that just wasn't safe for an aeroplane to drag a car in the air. So that's the only shot that we resorted to CGI, but everything else in it is practical. I remember afterwards, the few years later, the writer Scott Rosenberg saying to me, "Oh, wouldn't it be good if we'd had CGI when we did that? Think of the things we could have done at the end." And I went, "No, I wouldn't. Even if we had CGI, I wouldn't have used it because I'd much rather crash a real plane into a real building than do it fake because I think the audience can spot it, and that's what we did. We crashed a 25-ton, or maybe it was 50-ton. I don't know. It was a big plane. It was a real plane, and we crashed it into a real casino. So that was all done in camera and could only be done once, obviously. So I had 17 cameras going for that one moment from every conceivable angle, and 17 35 mil cameras is a big undertaking. Just to load them with film took a day practically. So yeah, it was definitely my preference to do it for real.
When do you think filmmaking becomes really intense? I mean, is it because of the long hours, or maybe having to shoot the scenes multiple times, or maybe working under really stiff weather conditions? I mean, practically many scenes of Con Air were filmed in the desert. I mean, it must have been at least 120 degrees, right?
Yeah, I mean the weather is always one of the biggest hazards you have to come up against. And we were in the desert for weeks and weeks, and we drank our way through thousands and thousands of gallons of water just to stay hydrated and to stay alive. And but then you also create your own problems. There's a scene in it where I really thought it'd be atmospheric to have a sandstorm, so I bring in all the wind machines and truckloads of dust and dirt, and people are shoveling this stuff into the wind machines. So we're working every day in a sandstorm, but it's self-inflicted. It was an idea I came up with and created. So I can't really complain because I could have just shot it in a nice sunny day, and but it wouldn't have looked as good. So sometimes it's the weather that you have no power over, but sometimes you create your own conditions. You say this will look much better in a rainstorm or a lightning storm, and you've got the difficulty of creating that, but you've also got to survive filming in it.
Simon, in general terms, what do you think is the most intricate part of filmmaking?
Um, well, the thing is planning is always the best, a solution to everything, and really, um, because when you're filming, you are, especially as you go on through the shoot, you have so little time to think, and you're usually working under strenuous physical conditions and mental conditions, and so you really want to have the best plan you can. So you have a plan written down that you can follow and everyone can follow. So you're not making things up on the day so much. You want to, you can leave a little bit of room for improvisation, but to keep things fresh and you see something better on the day. But really, it's all about the preparation. So it's your homework beforehand. It's the weeks and weeks sitting there planning every scene, every moment of every scene, and every thing that has to happen in the film. And the more preparation, the better the preparation, the easier it is to make the film. But things go wrong and things change. You lose locations. You might, an actor's schedule might not let you do things in the most efficient order because you really want that actor to be in it. So you sacrifice efficiencies because you really want that actor to play that part. So it's it's 10,000 decisions making a film, and you've just got to try and get as many of them as right as possible. And once you get over a certain percentage, the film is more likely to be a success and more likely to be safe if you're getting like 75% of the decisions right.
Right. And as I mentioned before, Con Air was your first feature film. The General's Daughter was the second film you directed. Con Air was produced by Jerry Bruckheimer and Mace Neufeld produced The General's Daughter. And how did these two gentlemen support you? I mean, obviously you had experience, of course. How does a great producer support you throughout the process?
Well, you really want your producer to be a partner, and someone like Jerry Bruckheimer is a real director's producer. He kind of understands how directors think, and he knows how to get the best out of you. And he knows that if he supports you and gets you what you need, you'll do your best work, and the film will benefit. So he has this skill also of managing the studio, or the people that are spending the money and are overseeing it, especially on a first film. Obviously, I was under a lot of scrutiny, and they have, I didn't find out till afterwards, but the studios have a list of your replacement, so that if anything goes wrong in the first couple of weeks, they don't like what they're seeing, or going way over budget or whatever, they know exactly who they're going to replace you with. So your producer is watching your back really, and making sure you're in your creative bubble and can do your best work without having to deal with all the complexities of the bureaucracy of studios and the corporate nature of the studios and all that stuff they have to do is you don't want that weighing down on you. And so you want to have a producer that takes some of the weight off your shoulders so you can think of just about shooting every day and getting the best out of the actors and doing your job. And they're someone like Jerry Bruckheimer is very good at that, at making everybody feel like they're getting what they need. He gets the studio, the film they need. He gets the director what they need to make the film. And so you come out of it as real partners and someone that is, especially someone as big and as experienced as Jerry Bruckheimer. I had a very big brother on the set, if you see what I mean. And it's nice to have that protection, because you can imagine a film of that size, your first film. There's a lot of people, are very dubious about whether you can pull it off. So you need a big brother with a big stick to to keep them at bay, so you can get on and make the film and prove them wrong, and say, yeah, I can make that film. And then with Mace, again, he's another great producer, or was a great producer. Sadly, he's not with us anymore, but he was a great material producer in terms of finding material and books and working on the script. And he found this book, The General's Daughter, Nelson DeMille book, and had been developing it for, I think, 7, 8 years with Paramount before I even got the script. And I met with him and I said, I really liked the world of it. I just thought it was a bit dry, the script, but I think the world was fascinating to me, that military, and the story is a credible story and partially based on real events. And but I said, I'd like to get back into it and read the book and see if what we can do with that. And then I went back and read the book and found all this humor in it that wasn't in the script, and this sort of gallows humor, because obviously it's a murder mystery, and there's some pretty dark events in the story, but there's also a lot of humor in it. And especially by that time, we'd cast John Travolta as the lead, who's very charming and very good with humor and a very warm kind of personality on screen, and it kind of exudes it from the screen, and he's got that twinkle in his blue eyes, and people love him. And you combine that with the humor out of the book, even the darker story can be palatable to an audience. And I thought, this is a very dark story, and it might be a little off-putting to people, but you put the humor in it at the right moment, obviously, and then you've got John Travolta delivering that humor. Then I thought we had a much better chance of success. And Mace supported me in that, and right up to the last minute, I think 4 weeks before we started shooting, I pretty much and I brought Scott Rosenberg back in from my Con Air days, and we just went through the book and pulled out all the best lines out of the book and just put them in the script. And that's what we ended up with. And I think that's why the film succeeded, is because of the humor in it, because it's obviously it's a great story, and there were some terrific actors in it who were doing terrific work, but it was also because even though it was tragic, there was a humorous character taking you through this dark world, which was John.
And you had a great cast once again, so we had become used to dealing with very versatile and versed actors. I mean, obviously in Con Air you had Nicolas Cage, you had John Cusack, John Malkovich, Danny Trejo, so many actors. And now you had John Travolta, James Woods, Madeleine Stowe, James Cromwell, and many others. And which challenges did this project present, as it was obviously quieter and also more nuanced than the Con Air was?
Yeah, I mean, I think the difference is with Con Air, I had very, accomplished actors. In fact, the actors I chose for it weren't action movie actors at all. They were, from the independent film world. So they were used to very, high quality, interesting films that they'd been in. And I was putting them in this sort of more of a comedic opera, and which, they also enjoyed because they never usually get to do those sort of things. But also it was a little strange, asking John Malkovich, who's done these incredible performances, to basically, just shoot a shotgun, and crack a joke and shoot a shotgun. But I think he loved it, and because he never usually got asked to do that kind of thing, he was always doing very serious period pieces. So we understood what the film we were making. We were making a fun summer movie. With The General's Daughter, it was equally accomplished actors, but on the other hand, I wasn't asking him to do anything ridiculous or outrageous, and I had a really good script, and that's your the magic is when you have actors that really want to say those lines and want to be in those scenes because they realize they're in a wonderful scene and then hopefully a wonderful film, and so it's actually much easier. You just get to work on a much more deep level with them because we're not trying to fix things or trying to excuse what we're doing or trying to make the film something it isn't. We have a great script with a great story and great and very accomplished actors, and they can just do their best work. So my job, as the director in that stage, I'm not going to tell these actors how to do anything. I'm not going to say, this is how you should do it because they're masters of their craft, and I'm the director, but I'm like the ringmaster, corralling this. and I'm the one that knows the whole story and how the whole thing I want it to look and how it to turn out. But they are obviously the masters of their particular character, and they're, incredible actors. So my job is really to create an environment where they do their best work. And so I sort of have to learn what each actor is most comfortable with, whether it's a lot of preparation, no preparation, being spontaneous and in the moment, or a lot of discussion beforehand, or no discussion, a lot of takes to try things out, or just a lot of takes to really finesse small details, or very few takes, and that can happen within one scene. Three actors in a scene can have completely different techniques of what they need. But I quickly try and learn what each actor needs to get the best work out of them, so the film benefits. So I'm not there to push, square pegs into round holes and make people do what they don't want to do or they're not comfortable with. Um, it's a collaboration, it's not, I'm not persuading anybody to do something that they don't believe in. I'm collaborating with them so we both come to the point where we both agree that this is what would happen or this is what the person would do, and everyone's comfortable, and they do their best work and they enjoy it, and it comes out on screen when they're comfortable. And I've been lucky, working with the top level of actors makes my life a lot easier in the that regard, because they're at the top of their game because they're really good at it and they're really skilled. So the discussions are much quicker and shorter than necessarily with a when I suddenly have an actor who's done almost nothing. Suddenly I have to really do a lot of work, and it slows down, and it gets more complicated. But when you have people of the caliber that I had in those films, it's much easier. Everybody knows what they're doing, and we just get on with it and enjoy what we're doing.
I assume you learn something new on every picture. How would you describe the learning curve at the beginning of your career?
Well, as I said, changing genres is fun for me because I watch a lot of films. I've never been someone that only likes one genre, and as I said, I started at the BBC in editing, and I was sort of trained in all different departments. I went through documentaries, I went through current affairs, arts documentaries, drama, traditional period drama, improvised drama. So I learned a lot at that stage of every type of filmmaking I was working on. So in improvised drama, I learned to work with actors and how to let the actors have some freedom and create their character. And then in current affairs, which is more like news, which is like a daily output of film, I learned not to panic basically, and like you've only got that day to get it, even to shoot it, edit it, and get it out. And how to keep your nerve, because sometimes things change on a film. You run out of time, you get hit by weather, and you have to think on your feet. And the best thing is not to panic and have a set of tools to get yourself out of trouble. And and documentaries, I learned not necessarily to um, make a film out of what you wanted to get when you were shooting, but what you actually ended up with getting. Because in a documentary, you don't really necessarily control what you're filming, and you get all this footage afterwards, and then you have to make a story out of the footage. And sometimes that happens, in a dramatic, fiction film, where you had one plan, but that's not the footage you got. You got slightly different or completely different. And even if it was what you planned, might think, you know what, I think there might be a better way of doing this, and let's try using the same footage but in a completely different way. And I learned that from documentaries. And so I think, every type of filmmaking I've done, I've learned. I take every day, on a film set. So that's those set of tools to use, because you build up a lot of, it's like a pilot in flying hours. The more flying hours you have, the more skills you have in terms of when you need them. If everything's going great and according to plan, it's you need less tools, but that never happens in film. So I'm grateful for all the different types of film I've worked on.
Thank you, Simon. And I would like to talk about the music of the General's Daughter. On Con Air, you had worked with Mark Mancina, Trevor Rabin. Why was Carter Burwell the right composer for this film?
Well, I was a huge fan of Carter's work, and I particularly, I think what clinched it was when I saw Fargo, and I saw this, very bleak shot of Dormant driving up a snowy road in a little car, and there was nothing going on, and there was this incredible, epic soundtrack playing that was so, majestic, and I just wanted to sit and listen to that music, and it was just sort of it made the film what it was in a way because it could have been a very small film in some ways, but this soundtrack was elevated every moment to such a level that I'd love to work with Carter. So I approached them about this, and I think again I was working in a world that was very archaic really. It was the military. So, and I approached the general store like it was a costume drama coming from the England. We're used to period costume dramas where everyone's speaking in this archaic way, everyone's wearing very certain way of dressing, certain way of addressing each other, and I transposed this onto the American military really, that it's very hierarchical. People address each other completely based on their position, where their rank, and it used to be like a social rank, but in the military, it's obviously just it's got a conceived rank, and so I just in my mind I was making a costume drama and a murder mystery, and so I wanted this sort of again this epic, elaborate, full orchestral soundtrack, and Carter understood that. And then Mace and I went to see him. He came down to LA and he rented a bungalow in the Beverly Hills Hotel. And we have to put in a grand piano in there for him. And he went down and spent weeks in this bungalow with just the piano, composing the score for it. And Mace and I went in to listen to it. And, we're used to hearing Carter Burwell with this incredible orchestral thing. And he's playing each scene's cue on just the piano. And it sounds tiny. And you go, well, I don't know. I mean, kind of wanted a really big soundtrack. And but you have to have faith, that he's an artist and he's, knows what he's doing. And I'm hoping people that hire me go, well, I may not get it, but I've hired him, so I'm going to let him do it. So I did have the same approach to sort of the people I hire, whether it's a DP or production designer or composer, and say, okay, well, I've heard his other work. He's an incredible artist. Even if I'm not getting it right now, I should let him have the space to work. And so he did. He composed it. I signed off on the score on a piano because he's not. A lot of composers will mock things up on a synthesizer with fake drums, fake violins, fake brass sections. So it sort of sounds like an orchestra. So you feel like you are getting a score, but Carter just bangs away on a piano, so you get away, a few notes here and there. But then, the next stage is, I turn up at the recording session and there is a 150-piece orchestra with every instrument you can imagine and a giant screen playing my movie, and he's conducting away with this orchestra, and it's incredible. And again, it's exactly what I wanted, this giant, epic, orchestral, beautiful score. And that's what I got. And so that's always been my theory is, you hire the right person, you get and then you let them run with it. You let them do their work that they're so um, well known for, or that why you hired them in the first place, you liked it. But then, having said that, I also wanted to have another little thematic music thread running through it, and because it's set in the South, and again, it was this very archaic kind of feeling to the look of the movie. I shot it like it could have been any period. You couldn't really tell what period it's. There's no computers in it. There's no mobile phones. There's no anything to give it away. Even the cars I chose that people drove were already 10 or 15 years out of date. So I like my films to be a little timeless. And I did the same with Con Air. There's nothing in it that really gives it away of what date it was. And so I wanted this other little musical thread through it. And I was talking to my editor, Glenn Scantlebury, about this. And I said I didn't want the sort of Ry Cooder twangy guitar cliche for the South. And I didn't want gospel because again, it was a little bit of a cliche. And he said, well, he knew this musician, Greg Hale Jones, who uh, took field recordings from the 20s, 30s, 40s, and these original recordings that were recorded out in the field, like some of them were recorded in jails, some in cotton fields, and there were real people singing, and then he remixed them with synthesizer beds. So these tapes, these field recordings, are actually sort of in the Washington, National Archive. So we had to go and get these tapes out and remix them with synthesizer beds, and that's what is the opening music to the titles of the music, and a couple of places in the film as well. But it gives this very dark um, undertow to the film, I think, and I love that part of the soundtrack. But of course, I didn't realize, of course, that the complications of that were that the Paramount lawyers then had to go and find all the descendants of the people that sang on those tapes back in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, so that they could pay them royalties for what their grandparents had done and sang. So I was told that there were Paramount lawyers paddling up bayous in Louisiana to little shacks on the bayous with checks in their hand to give out to the descendants of these people that sung um, on these recordings. And one of them even said that when we got the tape out, it had a photograph of these two sisters who were picking cotton in the fields. And when they found that when they came to give the check to the family, they said, "Oh, here's the picture, by the way." And the woman who took it said never seen a picture of her grandmother before, and saw her when she was like 15 or 16 years old. And it made a big difference to a lot of people's lives, for the descendants of those people that sang on those tracks. So um, I was very pleased with how that turned out. So the soundtrack is one of my favorite parts of The General's Daughter.
And you had worked with quite a few composers. Of course, we just talked about Carter Burwell. You had worked with Dario Marianelli, Mark Isham, Brian Tyler, Trevor Rabin, Mark Mancina. And how do you approach film music? Or let me be more exact. What do you think a good score, should offer a film?
Well, it's different for different films, and so things like when I did The Mechanic with Mark Isham, I said to him, I want a theme. I want the way James Bond has a theme, Mission Impossible has a theme. I want one of those cool hooky soundtracks that when you hear it, you go, "Oh, that's from that film." And you can have a classical version of this that as well, whether it's Out of Africa or Doctor Zhivago or something like that. As soon as you hear that music, you know it's that epic film. But I wanted more of the kind of 60s retro um, hooky theme, and so Mark worked on that for a while, and I said, it's really simple. I said, it's that like 5 note thing, ding, 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 something like that, and it's not complicated. It's just 5 notes or Jaws, with the 3 or 4 notes of the Jaws theme. And so he came back and he played me the score, and still wasn't right. And I was saying, I don't know, maybe it's not the right instrument. And it was an electric guitar, and still wasn't right. And he went away and he just changed the guitar. He came back and he changed from a Stratocaster to Gibson or something. I'm not sure which way around it was. It might have been the other way around. And it completely transformed it just by being on a different guitar. And I went, oh yeah, that's the theme. And then now it's still one of my favorite scores I have on my films is the Mechanic theme, because as soon as and it's sort of very 60s to me. It's like Get Carter, um, early James Bond, that sort of kind of or Ipcris File, those 60s lone wolf guys who are spies or hitmen or things like that. And so he perfectly hit that for me with that theme.
Do you think it's better to pick a different composer depending on the project, as opposed to let's say hiring the same group of people?
I mean, generally speaking, I try to work with the same people in most departments because there is a familiarity, and also once you've got a rapport, and if you found somebody really good, um, I try to work with them again because it takes out of those 10,000 decisions I said, those are the people you hire are the most important decisions. And if you've gone through a film with them already and you know what they're like and that they can deliver, and when you get along and you speak the same artistic language, then I'd much rather work with the same person again in every department. It's never usually workable though, because everybody has different schedules and everybody's on different projects. So the likelihood of everybody that I like being available at the same time on my next film, because I may make a film, at the most, one a year. They're doing 3 or 4 years, so the schedules get out of sync. So I definitely like working with the same people again. I mean, some people have certain um, extra skills, or different parts, or people just say, look, composers like I just do classical, or so other people say, I just do very contemporary, and they say, I'm not right for it. But generally speaking, I feel most people are pretty versatile. If they're good, they're good, and they can be good in many different ways. And because I hope to feel like I can work in different genres, because if you're a storyteller, it's still a story, whether it's comedy, drama, action. If you like it, some people don't want to change genres and don't like they're comfortable in one particular genre. But I prefer to work with the same people as much as possible. But unfortunately, it's rarely. But then I do collect new people, so I might have 3 or 4 people in each department that I really like working with. So if one's not available, I've got other people I like to work with. But it is kind of a little nerve-wracking working with a new person in a key position because, whether it's a cinematographer or a production designer, or any other department, it's risky because you don't know what you're going to get or whether you're going to gel, and you really need everybody to gel.
And speaking of cinematographers, you had worked with David Tattersall on Con Air, and then on The General's Daughter, it was Peter Menzies Jr. So, how do you adapt to a key person, a different key person that comes in, which is as important as the cinematographer, obviously?
Well, a lot with cinematographers, a lot of the time I have worked with them before in commercials. So because a lot of commercial DPs do go backwards and forwards between commercials and feature films. And I have not exactly tried people out in commercials, but it's definitely a great way to meet new crew members is to do a commercial with them in the past and see if you get along. And so with both David Tattersall and Pete Menzies Jr., I'd worked with them several times before I did feature films. And so they're people that sort of came up at the same time and may have done they and usually DPs have done way more feature films than you because they work so much more often. So even though we may have started at the same time, they would have accelerated and done 5 for every one of my one films. So yeah, I mean, again, generally speaking, I'd like to either have worked with them in another field, or if I worked with them before in a feature film, I've taken the chance, work with a new person, and then I get want to work with them again.
I would like to go back to the actors or actresses a bit. And The General's Daughter, for instance, features a scene which is very uncomfortable to watch, and also Leslie Stefanson is involved. It's the rape scene based on, or let's say, it's one of the key scenes, especially also because it's about it's how the murder mystery starts and unfolds. So, how do you talk to an actor or an actress when you know a potentially very uncomfortable scene needs to be shot?
Well, in those days, we didn't have things like intimacy coordinators. And so it was the director's responsibility to discuss these scenes. And with someone like Leslie, who was, young and a new, relatively new actress, it is very difficult. But we just talk about it a lot. We rehearsed it a lot, but it's still very traumatic because, actors and some actors, will need to go to that place that is, that's happening to their character mentally. They have to pretty much go there. And so for Leslie, that was very difficult. Other actors, like James Woods, for instance, in that film, uh, was loved the idea of, I mean, particularly love of being in a certain character in a certain mood. And the second I say cut, he stops and start talking about his skiing holiday, and he loves switching it on and off. Other actors have to stay in the moment, and have to stay in that mood, and that does make it very traumatic for them when you're doing a scene like that. But you try and make it as comfortable as possible. You have as few people on the set. You talk about it a lot before, and you try and do it as quickly as possible, so it isn't a long, drawn out process. And usually it's better for that anyway because um, they get there very quickly. It's very traumatic, and then it's over, and we can all move on. But it's only worth it if it's important for the story and the film. I'm not really interested in doing traumatic, distressing scenes for no reason, or just to spice up the film in some way. But in that film, that's what the whole film was about, and yeah, kind of had that character had to go through that.
Do you recall certain scenes you had to cut for either pacing or because you felt they didn't make sense after all?
It's strange is that I don't know what it is, but my style of filmmaking is I have very little left over, almost nothing. I know some directors will shoot a 90-minute film and they have a 3 hour rough cut and they have to decide all these scenes they've got to get rid of. And for some reason I don't it doesn't end up like that. I usually end up every scene I shoot is usually in the film. And definitely you can recut for pace and also change things with the order. Sometimes I've just changed the order of scenes within a film because you realize it works better that way. But if you've really worked on the script and you have a really great rapport with your screenwriter or and you've worked it all out before, if it works on paper, it generally works on screen, and you can tell on paper if it's not working. Um, and that's the dangerous thing if you say, okay, I'll fix it when I shoot it. And sometimes you can, and sometimes it doesn't fix, and then you have to fix it in the editing. And sometimes it still doesn't get fixed in the editing, and that's when you might have to cut it out. Um, and so always try and get it right in the script. But generally speaking, my rough cuts are usually 10 to 15 minutes longer than the final film, and that's really brought down to my films are nearly always 90 minutes long, and I have very little left over. It's just the way I do. I don't know whether it's I don't like wasting stuff, but I don't. Every scene I do as if it's going to be in the film, and so I don't shoot a lot of maybe scenes or let's try it this way, let's try it that way. I kind of what I shoot is the film. And I suppose maybe might be an editing training because I learned editing. So when as I'm shooting, I'm editing the film in my head. So there's not a lot of questions when I come to um, do the director's cut, and I work with the same editors, same small group, hopefully all the time, and they know me and I know them and I trust them. So they do a very tight cut the first time. So even when I'm shooting, they're cutting every day. They cut it very tight as if it's going to be in the film. So um, I like it that way. So I watch a very tight editor's assembly, and then the director's cut is a lot less work because we're really just tightening it up and polishing.
I know that many things could go wrong on a film because it's a high energy environment. You have to plan a lot, you have to schedule a lot. And can you recall an incident when something didn't go as planned and you realized, we actually need to reconsider the whole scene or change it a bit because we may encounter a budgetary issue?
Yeah, that's has happened. I've had it both ways. I've had it where it's a very major scene and something technically went wrong, but the scene is so important, we basically have to come back and do it again and get it right. I mean, that happened to me on Con Air where a cable broke when the plane was supposed to be dragged into the casino, and we'd spent all day setting up the cameras, all night setting up the rig to fire the plane in. We had 200 stunt people in front of it, and it was supposed to be shot at night. And then it wasn't ready until the sun was coming up, and right at the last moment, the cable that was pulling the plane in snapped, and the plane, instead of shooting at the casino, just slowly moved towards it and nearly fell off its ramp and destroyed itself. And that would have been like $1 million down the drain if that plane had. I mean, there was no other plane. I don't know what we would have done. And there's probably 5,000 people on the strip in Vegas watching it, and all we could do is come back the next day and do it again, because it's the culmination to the movie. And but luckily we didn't destroy the plane, and it was able, we just came back, reloaded the 17 cameras, and set it up again, and fired the cable, and that time it actually worked. So um, sometimes you can't reconceive it because that, it's especially in a big movie like that where you need a big ending. But I have had it the other way where I've uh, it's usually small things you have to sort of reconceive and think, how can I do this a different way? And that's why I said, the thinking on your feet and not panicking, and also not being so rigid that this can't be done any other way. It's actually, I quite like, it's quite fun trying to think of another way to approach the problem. And it keeps your mind active. Like, okay, well, we thought it was going to work this way, but let's see if we can do it another way. And that's what keeps it fresh.
Absolutely, thank you. And I would like to at least briefly talk about the Expendables 2. It was tremendously successful. Sylvester Stallone had directed the first one. He opted not to return for the second one in terms of directing it. So, did he actually have the right to approve the director for the second one? In this case, you?
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Because he started the franchise, and so I went and met him because the production company and studio asked me to direct it, and so obviously I said, well, I've got to meet Sly and clear all this. So I went to meet him and I said, are you okay with me, taking over the franchise? And, obviously you're going to be in it as well. So I'm going to be directing you. So, is that all going to be all right? And he said, oh, yeah, 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 no problem. He was like, he said, this is your film. You do it how you want to do it. And I think he was kind of relieved because the first one he wrote, directed, and starred in, and I think it nearly killed him. He was so exhausted, and the responsibility of doing the three, each one of those jobs is enough. But to do all three, I don't think he didn't, have any problem with handing over everything of the second one. And he was great, so he would come on the set and was every day as an actor and be really supportive and go, oh, this looks great, and he would tell the other actor, hey, this is great, this is way better than the first one. I'm sure he was doing it for morale purposes, and he didn't know it was going to be any good. So, if it was, but he was great support for that. So, and I actually like working with actors who have directed or produced because they know the pain you're going through. So they don't, some actors don't understand the responsibility and the stress you're under, and all the things you have to do, and they may think like, well, it's just they just have to deal with me today, they don't have to deal with everything else. So but I've actually found it very enjoyable working with actors who direct and produce as well, because they just want to make your life easy because they know what you're going through. So it was a good experience.
Thank you. And you mentioned before that you like to shoot everything in camera. CGI was more advanced when he did the Expendables. It was 2012, if I remember correctly. So did you have to quote unquote fight against somebody else's opinion who thought it might be better to use CGI as opposed to doing it in camera, perhaps?
No, I don't think anybody, you don't generally come up with it artistic, I think it's always to do with money, and so if you can do it within the schedule and within the budget, normally it's not an issue because people say, well, yeah, great, it's only if people feel like it's going to cost more and longer. And also it depends how experienced the producer is. If they think, well, we don't have to deal with that problem now, we'll just deal with the problem later, fix it in post, as they say. We'll fix it in CGI, not realizing that it's probably going to cost more in the CGI, and it probably won't look as good, and you have less control over it in a way. And when it does look bad, it's too late to do anything about it because there's no time to redo it, and there's the cost of redoing it in CGI is exorbitant. So I don't really usually have any pushback on doing things in camera because it's generally cheaper.
I am a big fan of, let's say, the real thing as a versus CGI. I mean, if CGI is a requirement because it is simply physically impossible and you have to opt for this approach, so be it. But I tend to think that in many films, CGI is used too strongly, and that practical effects take a backseat to the CGI effects for whatever reason, or a reason other than a financial reason. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that doing it in camera, the audience is sophisticated enough. They still CGI still has a hard time fooling the human eye and the human brain. And even though it's sort of fantastic and exciting, people definitely know that it's not didn't really happen, and so they're less on the edge of their seats, I feel. And that's why I would always I don't have a problem using CGI if you don't see it. That to me it's I'd use any tool because filmmaking is tricks. None of you want to be it's like a magician. You want to be sleight of hand and make people think these things are happening. And if CGI helps you do that, that's great. But I tend to use it for sleight of hand where you can't see it's being used, and also for safety reasons. If there's something that's putting someone in too much danger, then these stunt people are incredibly brave and will do anything, and incredible performers and have done terrific stuff. But if I feel it's too dangerous, and also the stunt coordinator will also weigh in on that, then definitely I'll use CGI because there's no point anyone being put in danger when you can do it through CGI.
Can you disclose a detail or two about your upcoming projects?
Yeah, funny enough, I've just shot, well, I actually shot two films last year, which I'm in post on both of them. And one is Christoph Waltz, Lucy Liu, Cooper Hoffman, sort of a character, wry humor hitman story. And Christoph is a sort of an aging hitman who is losing his ability. He's got arthritis in his hands, so he can't shoot straight anymore. So he is he's been forced to take on an apprentice by his bosses, and that's Cooper Hoffman, who is kind of outrageous Gen Z, gender fluid dresser. Who Christoph is this old. The film's called Old Guy, and Christoph is the old guy, and he's the grumpy old hitman who hates this new guy, and of course they hate each other to start with, and then of course they save each other and they grow to be friends. And it's a great little character story between these two generations. And I'm just in post on that at the moment, and that should be out later this year. But I also shot an action comedy with Rebel Wilson, which is much more of a full on. It's much more in the Con Air Expendables 2 genre, which is just an absolute kind of riot comedy with big action scenes, and takes place at a big billionaire's wedding. And Rebel is a secret agent, and she is also a bridesmaid. So she's a bridesmaid and a secret agent, and she takes on a gang of bad guys who are holding hostage all her wedding guest friends. And again, I'm in post on that, and that will also be out later this year.
Is there anything else you would like to add, Simon, before we wrap up for today?
No, I think that covered it. It was nice talking about General's Daughter again. It's one of my favorite films actually, and I deliberately went for a drama after Con Air because Con Air was, such a action comedy that I deliberately went for something that was more dramatic and involved and a deeper story, I thought. So, but it was fun to talk about it. And as I said, favorite uh movie of mine, favorite soundtrack of mine. So it was great to talk about it.
Yeah, the film certainly stands out in your filmography, so it's also one of my personal favorites of yours. That's for sure.
No, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Great. Simon, thank you very much for taking a time out of your schedule. I really had a great time talking to you, and I hope you enjoyed it too.
Me too. Okay, nice to talk to you. Take
Take
care.
care.
Thanks, Michael.
Bye.